My next patron question is from Caitlin, who wants to know if a specific movie studio had a good decade. You mentioned 1986 was good for Paramount at the box office. I looked at Paramount the other years of the 80s and it was really good. Paramount usually had a couple movies or just one movie in the top 10 for the year and had many hits that decade. So why do you think the decade was really good for Paramount? Caitlin is right that Paramount had a very strong decade during the 1980s, with several notable hits and films that captured the audience's interest. Of course, like any well-run studio, part of it has to do with the executives in charge, and many of them are recognizable names. The CEO of Paramount at the start of the decade was Barry Diller, followed by Frank Mancuso Sr. Michael Eisner was the president, and after he left to run Disney in 1984, Sid Gaines took over the position. Ned Tannen was the president of the Motion Picture Group for a good amount of the 80s, while the president of production went through a revolving door of executives, including Don Simpson, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Don Steele. These are the people who look over scripts and projects and decide what to put in front of cameras, so they're worth mention. Paramount already started strong with American Gigolo, that first movie in the 80s, which was a decent-sized hit. The rest of 1980 would bring forth other hits like Friday the 13th, Urban Cowboy, Airplane, The Elephant Man, and that year's Best Picture winner, Ordinary People, although there was the interesting case of Popeye. While it's sometimes referred to as a flop, it actually did turn a tidy profit for Paramount, further helped by them splitting the production costs with Disney. However, they expected much bigger returns, and the studio viewed it as a disappointment, which I personally find unfair. I don't know why they thought it would do Superman numbers. 1981 was an okay year, mainly helped by the enormous success of Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was by far Paramount's biggest hit, while The Postman Always Rings Twice, Friday the 13th Part 2, and Mommy Dearest performed modestly enough. Warren Beatty's Reds was a film that went wildly over budget, and on the surface it seems like it was a box office disappointment. But it did the best it could for an over 3-hour movie about communism, and according to Beatty, it did make a small profit when all was said and done. Dragon Slayer would fall more into the flop category, and even though it was acclaimed and received 8 Oscar nominations, Ragtime also did not pull in a big audience. 1982 was a great year for Paramount, with several hits like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, An Officer and a Gentleman, 48 Hours, and Friday the 13th Part 3. Even disappointments like Grease 2 and Airplane 2 did not hurt them too much. 1983 similarly had Trading Places, Flashdance, Staying Alive, and Terms of Endearment proving very successful for the studio. 1984 was propped up by Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. People talk about Hollywood being reliant on franchises now, but as you can see, sequels have long been a core part of the big studios. Although Paramount also scored original hits with Footloose and especially Beverly Hills Cop. Although there were the underperformers, like the comedies Top Secret and Best Defense, and the romance Falling in Love. 1985 was an underwhelming year for the studio, though. There were a few hits like Witness and that year's Friday the 13th entry. However, while Clue, Daryl, and Explorers would gain followings later, they were not successful during their initial run. Young Sherlock Holmes did get saved by its international performance, but despite being intended as the start of a potential franchise, a sequel was never made. Like Caitlin mentioned in the question, I did say that 1986 was a fantastic year for Paramount in another video. Roll the footage. The biggest hit that year was Top Gun, which was also the highest-grossing movie of 1986. The studio also scored sizable and nicely profitable hits with Crocodile Dundee, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, The Golden Child, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Children of Lesser God, and Pretty in Pink. Even Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, despite being the lowest-grossing film in the series up to that time, made money back in its small budget. 1987 was another strong year for the studio, thanks to Beverly Hills Cop 2, The Untouchables, Fatal Attraction, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Summer School, and Eddie Murphy Raw. 1988 additionally had plenty of box office winners, like Coming to America, Crocodile Dundee 2, The Naked Gun, Scrooged, The Accused, and Friday the 13th Part 7, although there were some disappointments, like Big Top Pee-wee, She's Having a Baby, and Tucker the Man in His Dream. Paramount would end the decade on a decent note in 1989, with hits like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, Major League, Black Rain, and Pet Sematary. They did have some films considered disappointments, though. I brought up Star Trek V in my recent video talking about 1989 in cinema. Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, turned a small profit considering how cheap those movies were to make, but it was the lowest grossing movie in the series, and New Line Cinema would even take over the next few movies in the franchise. Harlem Nights was considered a major disappointment, probably only making its money back when video sales were factored in, and Fat Man and Little Boy was a sizable flop. So looking at Paramount in the 80s, they overall seemed to find a lot of success with major franchises, comedies, especially ones with Eddie Murphy, and even films that tackled serious topics. This was largely thanks to a combination of exciting scripts, directors with creative visions, and characters that audiences attached themselves to and were willing to see in multiple adventures. Although, as William Goldman famously said, a studio slate is so often the luck of the draw, and hoping what gets the green light will be something people will want to see. And in the 80s, audiences relied primarily on the poster from the theater, word of mouth, reviews, well-cut TV spots, and if their favorite actor happened to be in it. So studio hoped they made the right choices in those departments. Clearly, Paramount made a lot of smart decisions throughout the Reagan years. Thank you for your question, Caitlin.